Hello, welcome to the Officio Spotlight podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb and thank you very much for listening. Today, I'm really excited to say we get the opportunity to talk about one of the most pressing subjects in the topic of procurement and supply chain right now, and something that we know a lot of our listeners are keen to discuss and understand more about, which is, of course, the impact of the conflict in Ukraine. So I'm delighted to say that today my guest is Patrick Penfield. So Patrick is Professor of Practice, Supply Chain Management and Director of Executive Education at Whitman School of Management in Syracuse University. He has a PhD in Sustainable Resource Management in addition to his career in academia, has over 15 years experience in industry, working in companies like Raymond Corporation, Johnson & Johnson and Philips Electronics. So Patrick, thanks again so much for joining us for this conversation. This whole period of the last 2 years has been, I guess, very unprecedented in supply chains generally. We are just coming out of a period of pandemic where supply chains were impacted enormously, and now suddenly we find ourselves in this conflict which has global repercussions. So it would be great with your expertise just to understand how that all fits together, what this following on from the pandemic means for supply chains globally, and what you see as the kind of really big issues.
Yeah, so Simon, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It seemed like, we were just recovering. And so probably the best analogy I can give you is when somebody's sick and you recover and then you get another sickness. And that's kind of what's happening with today's supply chain. It's just can't seem to recover, and we can't seem to progress to how things used to be before the pandemic, right back to normalcy. So yeah, there's a lot of issues, lots of problems with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's really causing some undue stress within the global supply chain. So specifically with energy prices. So that right now is my biggest concern. And so unfortunately, it seems like everybody's getting hit, with these increases, especially in Europe. So the problem with energy is this, and I guess it's not necessarily a problem, but here is why you need energy. Energy helps grow economies. So if you have cheap, plentiful amounts of energy, then usually you can grow your economy pretty quickly and pretty fast. But when energy prices start to get higher and higher and higher, that's when things start to get pulled down from an economic standpoint. And that's a big concern. And that's a concern I have, based on today's world is, are we going to be able to do okay from a growth standpoint based on what's happening with energy prices?
Yeah. And in terms of Ukraine itself and then Russia and maybe starting with the sanctions, have you ever seen a situation where a single economy has been put under sanctions of this kind of strength before? I mean, I guess we've seen stuff of Russia when they invaded Crimea in 2014 and Venezuela. But as a supply chain expert, have you seen these kind of political moves made with this level of impact previously?
No, not at all. And it's actually shocking to me. And this is kind of the dilemma, is we really don't know what's going to happen to the whole economy based on what we're doing to Russia. So the problem is again, from a supply chain standpoint, we're very dependent on Russia, one, again, for energy, right? But there's other things like fertilizer. So fertilizer is a big thing, especially for farmers. And so if they can't get that, obviously prices will go up. I do want to make it clear with your listeners, there's plenty of supplies, plenty of resources. The issue is that when you take supplies and resources out, then everything else goes up in cost. Right. So for us, this is kind of the situation that we're in with what's going on with Russia, since we've kind of really decided to just cut off all relationships and trade with Russia. This is really kind of what is going to impact us. Now, the other issue is Ukraine. So Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe. So, and this is kind of how I think is, okay, right now we have enough food supplies. So we're good. The unfortunate thing is the 2021 harvest was very small. It was in comparison to the 2002 harvest that we had. So it wasn't very good to begin with. Now, Simon, think about this, right? So Ukraine, again, breadbasket of Europe, nobody's planning anything right now. Right now, you've got tanks, you've got munitions, you've got bombs, you've got people rolling through. So this is something that very, very concerned with, more so as far as what's going to happen in June, July, when there's no harvest. Another issue we have in that area, nothing's getting out, so you can't ship anything. So that's another dilemma, right? Even if they have any supplies, you can't ship that stuff just because of all the blockades and all the things that are going on from the Russians and some other folks. So yeah, big concerns as far as, how this is all going to unfold later on in the year. The longer this invasion keeps going on, then I think the more pain the world will see later on in the end of the year.
Yeah. And Patrick, just for our listeners, the other impact, I guess, is also products coming into some of these economies. So if you can, it'd be really helpful to get a sense of where Russia sat in a global supply chain generally.
I mean, if you look at Russia, Russia is really very focused on raw materials, right? So that's really kind of their bread and butter, no pun intended. Their focus is energy, right? So they're kind of the gas station to the world for the most part, especially in Europe. So, again, Europe's very dependent on Russia for gas and oil. So they're the second largest exporter of crude oil. And secondly is fertilizer. So fertilizer, again, is if you're a farmer, this is really, something that you absolutely need, right? So this is something that we'll start to see impacting farmers in addition to energy prices going up. And then if you look at, there's some other stuff, copper, nickel. So we're already starting to see some issues right now, some cost pressures, things are going up with nickel and with copper. So if you look at that, that's really kind of Russia's bailiwick is, again, the raw resources. That's what they have and that's what they give. Now, Ukraine's a little different, right? So Ukraine is more from a farming type of a environment. Another thing that they supply is neon. And so neon's used in semiconductor production. They produce 70% of the neon for the semiconductor industry. So we've already been having issues with semiconductors. So a lot of your automotive companies have been struggling to try to get semiconductor chips. This is going to get worse. So what'll happen with the semiconductor chips, most of these semiconductor manufacturers have anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks of neon. The problem is once that supply is gone, where are they going to get it? There's only 2 other places in the world that you actually can get neon. That's the United States and that's China. The problem is that both countries are not scaled up to replace that 70% that Ukraine used to produce. So this is going to be a very big dilemma for a lot of the semiconductor producers. So I think that's the other dilemma is if you're a big company like a Ford or General Motors or, Mercedes-Benz or whatever, this is kind of your dilemma. It's just that down the supply chain, it's that tier 2, that tier 3 suppliers that you're like, oh my God, I have to think about that now, which is unfortunate, but this is, the harsh reality of today's world.
In your conversations with CPOs or big corporates at the moment, how are you seeing them react to this situation?
A friend that's a vice president of supply chain, and he asked me, Pat, you want to come on back into the supply chain world? And I said, well, no, not right now. He and I have discussions, and he's told me it's a struggle. Every day you come in and there's something else that goes wrong. And so that's kind of what's going on with supply chain managers right now is they're really trying to have to kind of understand how do you get through a problem or a situation. So that's really what they're doing, a lot of firefighting. And again, it's just other issues, right? So just transportation is an issue, just trying to truck stuff or to ship stuff or, to get things through ports. I think every day, supply chain professionals really have their work cut out for them. I will tell you this, I think, we really should applaud supply chain professionals for all the things they've been doing and enduring, since COVID. I mean, they've done some miraculous things that people don't understand. This is very interesting. Nobody really kind of even knew what supply chain meant, and for the most part, but now it's on everybody's
headline news.
The other unfortunate thing now, when something goes wrong, everybody's blaming the supply chain. It's because of the supply chain. That's why we can't. Yeah, it's good. People are learning about the supply chain, but the bad is that, we're the fault person.
I agree. I mean, we're reflecting on the fact that in the last 2 years, I've seen more headlines about supply chain than I've ever seen previously, right? It's, whether it's vaccines, PPE or anything else, it's suddenly headline news.
Yeah, I think that's been part of it. And Simon, I think the other thing is that supply chains become so global in nature. And so this is, I think what we're seeing is that we really took it for granted. We didn't really have these problems before. And so we just assumed that, hey, we can, buy things from China, or from Russia or wherever, and everything should go flawlessly. There shouldn't be any issues and any problems. And now COVID really kind of exposed, I think, just the issues and problems that we have with the global supply chain.
Yeah, coming back to the Russia-Ukraine situation, when we look at the sanctions, the impact of those sanctions against some of the areas that you've talked about, where do we sit on the life cycle? I mean, are we looking forward to this situation getting significantly worse? Do we think the sanctions have had an impact already?
Yeah, I think it's at least 1 year worth of pain. That's kind of what I see. And really, what could alleviate the situation is, again, if there could be some resolution towards, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If we could get past that and we could end that, but the damage has been done somewhat also, right? So it would take a couple months just to recover from when it ends. I think that's the other thing. A lot of companies, a lot of supply chain folks are very resilient these days, right? We've learned that term resiliency, right? So it's really kind of important. So I think everybody's looking at, okay, if I can't get it here, where else can I get it? And that's usually a good supply chain professional trying to figure out what can we do to get a backup plan. I think a lot of companies have realized that that's essential and very important in today's supply chain is what's our backup plan? How can we pivot to be able to meet demand to make sure that we have what we need from a resource standpoint. Yeah, it's a big disruption. So again, the longer the conflict plays out, I think for at least for 2022, it'll be a difficult year. It's a difficult situation because Russia does supply a lot of needed resources to the world. So it's not like you can turn them off and then turn somebody on, because obviously those resources aren't readily available. So, this is kind of the dilemma that we have is, again, how do we, again, make sure that we get what we need in order to take care of our customers?
And presumably while we're in this period where the majority of the world is looking for alternative supplies that isn't Russia, there will be enormous price pressure. I mean, maybe inflation would be something else I was very keen to get your views on. What do you see from that perspective?
Yeah, I see double-digit inflation here in the United States, double-digit without a doubt. And again, I see double digits because I don't know if that'll be more than 15%. Right now, it seems to get worse and worse. I'll give you another example. Let's talk about edible oils. Ukraine supplies 80% of sunflower oil to the world. Edible oil is cooking oil. These different oils, they kind of look at each other. And so if there's one that's unavailable, then the price goes up on the other one. So it's really kind of an interesting. So you're talking about soybean oil and vegetable oil and, palm oil. So all these oils, because there's no sunflower oil available, they've gone up in price. So there's this interesting connection between these edible oils that's happening. And it's due again to the actual thing that's going on with Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah. Are there issues around kind of shipping and just transportation of goods? I mean, I've seen, for example, some of the big shipping companies refusing to work with Russia. Is that going to have a big impact?
Yeah, I think so. So, the ports are stressed as it is, especially here in the States. And so, on the West Coast, we've got some issues there. We're still very congested. And it's not only the United States, it's other places. When you do that and you've got shippers shipping stuff from Russia and people are turning that away, that takes up space, that takes up time, that takes up, a workforce. It's not good when that type of stuff happens. It just causes chaos within the ports. I think that's the other dilemma that we have is that container pricing still is pretty high. It's causing a lot of, again, stress. And that's partially part of the inflation equation is, again, having these high shipping costs. So I think, it's not good when that happens. It just causes more disruptions. And so there's too many disruptions right now with the port as they are. We're looking for hopefully some normalcy one day where, you ship something and goes right to the port, they can unload it and ship it to your customer. Right now, that's not the case at all. And I'd say, for the most part, most of the world's ports are kind of struggling right now based off of demand and trying to recover from what happened last year. And, it's tough. I'll tell you one thing that we're really stressed out about here in the States is just the longshoreman contract that expires in July. That is, longshoremen are kind of known as the royalty of unions. And so they're very strong. And so they can control those ports very well. So with this contract expiring, and we've got a mess right there, still congestion, still backup, that could cause issues and more problems, right? So the big thing for most of your viewers is probably container prices. I don't see those going down yet just because demand is so high. With the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, I'm sure it'll cause prices to go up even more.
Patrick, clearly this conflict is a terrible situation. Do you think that supply chains, global businesses generally, will there be any positives that emerge from this? Will supply chains be more resilient? Will companies be able to react to these kind of events more effectively in the future, do you think? Or do we have very short-termist memories on these issues?
Yeah, I think we've gotten better. If there's anything that the silver lining with the pandemic is that companies kind of understood to pivot better. Now they realize that, hey, we've got to have dual sources, or hey, we've got to have, one source in Asia and one source in Mexico, trying to make sure that they're kind of managing the risks within the supply chain. And so I think that's helped us immensely. Believe it or not, I think because of COVID, a lot of companies are able to deal with the situation that's happening with Russia and Ukraine. If it weren't for COVID, I think we'd have some huge disruptions happening within the supply chain. But I think we've learned that, hey, this is kind of our new normal, right? We've got to be able to deal with these situations. I think the other thing is weather events. So you'll see more of that in the future. Yeah, if anything, I think if the good companies, they realize that, hey, when a situation happens, we've got to have our backup plan, or we've got to have an alternative, and hopefully we plan for that. You have to expect that in today's world. There's going to be issues and there's going to be problems, and you have to have a plan in place when something occurs.
We talked about the fact that supply chains are now, in the last few years, headline news, very much on the agenda of even the mainstream media. You're a person that is educating and bringing up the next generation of supply chain professionals. I'm just really interested in terms of people coming to you now and in your classes. Is it different now to say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because of this focus on supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you the big difference is And this is the cool thing as an educator. Every day I can bring in an article or some type of material or a video clip that's specific to the supply chain. It's awesome. I mean, from an academic standpoint, I enjoy this because it's fun to watch, and also to be able to take what I'm teaching in the classroom and then bring up a current event that happened yesterday and say, see, this is what's going on. This is what you have to do. This is how you deal with this particular situation. Yeah. So from an academic standpoint, this has been awesome material for me, although it's horrific for the supply chain, but it's great. And the students like it too, because then they can see the connection, right? And then they're like, oh, this is why this is going on, and this is what we learn. And so, what I'm saying is true, or what I'm saying is something that they can get some knowledge from and they can actually apply later on in their careers. It's been fantastic in the classroom just to have these situations and be able to talk about this. So it's great, like I said, when something current.
I think that's a great place to draw the conversation to a conclusion. Thank you again for agreeing to be part of this conversation. It's such a timely and important topic, and to have an expert of your standing to discuss this with, it was a real honor. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you for having me, and good luck, and we'll hopefully see you in the future.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please click the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also absolutely love to hear your views. So please do leave us a review on those platforms, or indeed send me a message on LinkedIn. And we'll be back soon for another discussion with senior industry figures.